CTV's W5.
It affects the immune system. It affects every organ.
A deadly virus leaves a painful legacy.
My body isn't the same right now.
Doctors have no idea what's going on.
We're trying to warn people this could potentially happen to you.
And
they have no right of appeal for their treatment.
an invisible workforce pays a heavy price.
You're spending so much time away from your family, time away from your wife, time away from your kid.
They're not just workers, they're people.
This is CTV's W5 with Avery Haines.
Welcome to season 55 of W5. For months now, we have all been glued to the daily COVID tally, the number of confirmed cases, the number of deaths. And the one bright spot through it all has been the number of Canadians who are listed as recovered. But just what does it mean to recover from COVID-19? Some survivors say their future is bleak, and they're worried their health may never be the same. Dr. Mike Chow appears to be the picture of perfect health.
I was pretty fit and I'm healthy normally. I don't get sick very often.
Against a majestic backdrop in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, the 58-year-old dentist takes strong, confident strides. But what you're witnessing are actually just baby steps on a long and uncertain road of recovery from COVID-19.
Just because you're virus-free doesn't mean your body's back to normal the way it was before COVID hit you. And my body isn't the same right now.
You're still recovering 6 months in.
I'm only still recovering, rehabbing, and just trying to build my body back up and my lungs and heart back up. I know they looked at my heart, they were worried about that as well.
Despite being a marathon runner, avid golfer, skier, and all-round outdoorsman, Dr. Chow was cut down by COVID last March. He lost 45 pounds, had to relearn what most of us take for granted, how to walk, how to swallow, even how to breathe. All these months later, he still suffers fatigue and wonders whether his body will ever be the same again.
The main issue I have right now is stiff joints throughout my body. I first initially noticed stiff finger, my right index finger in the hospital. My toes, knees, shoulders, hips, everything. When I first wake up is when it's worst.
In sharp contrast to his afternoon jog, Mike's mornings, months after being cured of COVID, are a struggle just to move.
Morning, hun. How's it going? How you feeling?
Stiff, like normal.
Mike's wife, Dana, has been video documenting his journey back.
Is it worse today than the other day? The same, pretty much?
Yeah.
And how are these hands doing? Can you grip it all this morning?
No, I can't make a full fist. Not with my right index finger. That's the worst one.
It's one of the lesser-known consequences of a COVID infection. A form of debilitating arthritis hobbles Mike in the mornings. Little is known about just how much permanent damage is done by the virus. And while Mike appears healthy on the outside, there are fears about what COVID may have done on the inside. This is what Mike's lungs looked like when he was rushed to hospital last March, unable to breathe. Those white clouds are inflammation and infection, typical COVID lungs. Mike's most recent x-rays, a full 6 months later, show that while COVID may be gone, scarring has been left behind. So how does that affect Mike's ability to breathe? He's about to find out.
Okay, so just relax, normal breathing, okay?
Mike is undergoing a lung function test at Royal Columbian Hospital.
Okay, little breath, in, out.
He repeatedly blows into the machine, which measures how much air his lungs can hold.
And big breath in. Blow it out now, Michael.
And how forcefully he can push out the air.
Keep going. 3, 2, and blow it out.
The test reveals that Mike's lungs are functioning well, considering his critical illness. but scarring has created some mild impairment in his ability to take oxygen in and get rid of carbon dioxide. But the scars are not just physical. There's emotional damage as well. Dana and their 2 children are still haunted by the months of uncertainty while Mike was fighting for his life. Especially traumatizing, what they feared would be their final phone call before Mike was hooked up to a ventilator.
Here is your opportunity to say goodbye to your husband and to your dad for your children. I can't imagine that.
We just kept saying, I love you, stay strong, you know, you're gonna get through this, and we'll see you soon. And then when we hung up and shut the iPhone down, the kids and I just hugged each other and we just broke down. And we just cried and hugged for I don't know how long. It was the hardest thing ever.
Mike, when you hear what those moments were like for Dana and for your kids, what's that like to hear that?
It's upsetting. I don't want my family to go through hell because of me or anyone. Even now, I'm feeling upset just watching my wife retell the story and how emotional she gets.
Mike Chow's medical odyssey began here on March 6th at the annual Pacific Dental Conference in Vancouver. Canada had not yet begun to shut down, and so some 15,000 people converged for one of the largest dental gatherings in North America. And in the ensuing days, a devastating realization.
A recent dental conference in Vancouver is being linked to multiple cases.
That dental conference was the first super spreader event in British Columbia. 87 people were infected. One Vancouver area dentist died from his exposure, and fellow dentist Mike Chow nearly lost his life to the disease.
Mike was one of our first desperately ill COVID patients.
Dr. Greg Helgen is the head of the intensive care unit at Surrey Memorial Hospital.
He decompensated very, very quickly, requiring full life supportive measures within a couple hours of arriving in the hospital. It was kind of an all hands on deck situation.
Mike would spend 2 months in this hospital, 19 days connected to a ventilator. Dana's neighbors did what they could to share their support in socially distant times.
They'd strung a set of Christmas lights around the tree in our front yard, and then each neighbor in our immediate cul-de-sac had strung lights up.
Well, my neighbours put up lights today in honour of Mike. Lights of hope.
And he said, we're gonna keep these shining. We're not gonna turn them off until Mike comes home.
When Mike was finally taken off the ventilator, the disease and the treatment of the disease had taken a toll. His weight had plunged to 120 pounds, and being on the ventilator for so long robbed him of even the most basic abilities.
You had to relearn everything.
Yes.
I mean, breathing.
Breathing, swallowing, being able to eat without choking. That took a long time. Just speech, to walk. I couldn't even stand up on my own. I couldn't even take a couple of steps without a walker initially. I could not do anything really. It was traumatic.
After weeks of intensive therapy, Mike finally regained enough strength to leave the hospital. The hallways were lined to cheer out a man who many feared might not make it.
I appreciate everything very much. Glad to be alive here. Thank you, everyone.
And in his neighborhood, an emotional welcome home.
My husband is home, yay!
Mike has been slowly regaining his strength since that homecoming. But like many COVID ICU patients, he hasn't fully recovered.
The ventilator's like having a cast on the entire body. Every muscle wastes away. Your body burns it for fuel. The sitting up muscles, the breathing muscles. Weakness is a very common complication.
The recovery from COVID and the recovery from the treatment of COVID are two different things, but it's almost like this double whammy of work that your body has to do, not only to fight back against the effects of the disease, but also against the effects of the treatment.
That's very true. Just COVID itself, it causes a tremendous amount of inflammation. When you have a disease process like COVID that's frankly in the blood, it's not just in the lungs, that inflammation, that redness, the pain, the swelling goes everywhere the blood does. It affects the immune system. It affects every organ. And of course, that's not just the heart and the lungs, it's also the kidneys and the brain. Even just a simple infection with COVID for many people can have lasting effects. They're struggling to regain their strength and their fitness. We've seen rashes that are unexplained. We've seen arthritis. But in terms of really all the complications, we're very much in the early stages of understanding this virus and its consequences.
One of the key players in a national effort to understand the long-term fallout from the disease is Dr. Margaret Herridge with Toronto's University Health Network. She's the co-lead of a massive research study on the hunt for answers.
This is a very large research consortium of over 100 investigators across Canada.
Dr. Herridge says recovery from any critical illness is a lengthy process. But COVID carries an added punch, especially when it comes to organ damage, including to the brain.
Some of these organ systems that we saw were more injured in the intensive care unit may have significant long-lasting repercussions. These patients often will have stroke syndromes or bleeding into the brain. Patients may be also more at risk for heart or cardiac complications that can affect the heart muscle itself, the heart lining, the heart valves.
There's this sense that the recovered are up and at 'em and ready to continue on their life like they did before they had COVID. That's just not the case for many people.
This is a frequent comment I had from the patients. No, everyone expects me to snap out of it. We need to really focus in on a lot of these organ systems, in particular brain dysfunction, that may be an important barrier for many folks to return to their original work or workplace. And I think at this point, it's really not clear where everyone's going to be a year later.
Back in British Columbia, Dr. Mike Chow has been relentless in using exercise to try to regain what COVID robbed him of. And his wife Dana hopes that the worst is behind them.
Are you scared about the future, given that there's so much unknown about the long-term effects of COVID?
We don't know if anything else is going to pop up medically in the future with anything, or hopefully he just gets stronger with his daily regimen of exercise. Right now we're just taking it one day at a time, enjoying the fact that Mike's home with us and trying to enjoy life as best we can.
Coming up,
The scariest part has been not knowing what the future will hold.
confronting pain and uncertainty
I haven't even had a chance to live life yet.
when W5 continues.
Okay, let's take a look here. Let me know if anyone's different or uncomfortable.
Dr. Mike Chow is trying to get his old life back.
Okay, I'll go up right here, okay?
Putting in a few hours a week at his dental clinic in Pitt Meadows, British Columbia. Once a marathon runner, Mike still needs to pace himself. 6 months after being infected with COVID-19, his x-rays and lung function test show some scarring on his lungs. He suffers fatigue and, at times, debilitating arthritis.
I think there's some Greek salad for you.
Thanks, son.
Mike and his doctors at least know that he had COVID and that his symptoms and recovery are being monitored, even researched.
I've been sick about 5 months.
But an untold number of Canadians have for months been struggling with chronic, life-altering COVID symptoms.
Brain fog, dizziness, crushing fatigue.
I feel like I'm twice my age. I'm 41.
They feel largely ignored by the medical community.
You guys have all been suffering in silence until you found each other on this Facebook group.
And they call themselves the long haulers. We gathered some of the so-called long haulers for a virtual town hall.
Hair loss is a big one. I've lost a lot of hair.
I'm almost bald in the back of my head.
Yeah, I'm like right up here. It's all gone.
There's not a day that goes by where I can live my life the way I used to. Like, I'm struggling every day.
What I'm left with now is a lot of neurological damage that has remained.
Most developed classic COVID symptoms before mass testing was available, so they never got tested for the disease. They are part of this Canadian online support group, which has ballooned to 3,900 members. Do you guys feel invisible since you're not in any of those daily numbers that came out? You're not a positive, you're not recovered, and you're not dead.
What they're not considering is all the people out there that are like the Walking Dead. So we've survived, but we're really, really being impacted, and we don't know what our futures look like.
I was healthy beforehand too, and I haven't even had a chance to live life yet. And it just feels so cut short right now.
You know, what's extraordinary is as you're each talking about the symptoms that you're experiencing, you're all nodding.
Yeah, it's nice to know you're not alone.
Dozens of members of this long hauler support group have written this letter addressed to each of the chief public health doctors across the country. Their request? More research and greater public awareness of the potential for prolonged symptoms.
We're trying to warn people this could potentially happen to.
I'm Chandra Pasma. I've been sick since March 16th.
Chandra Pasma was one of those who signed her name to the letter.
What else did we get in our box today?
She and her entire family have been struggling with chronic COVID symptoms since mid-March.
Today is day 158 for me.
158 days of not feeling like yourself.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people who are in this boat that in March and April, it was very difficult to get access to a test in Canada if you hadn't traveled, if you didn't have exposure to a known case. In our case, we actually did discover we had exposure to a known case, but our family doctor told us to just stay at home and keep managing the symptoms.
The symptoms they were managing were textbook COVID: high fever, hacking coughs, loss of taste and smell. And some 6 months later, a simple family day at the park leaves them exhausted.
A couple more minutes, okay? You can do this.
I cannot.
You can.
Chandra and her children have also developed these strange recurring rashes that clear up only to reappear a few weeks later.
I actually have a picture here.
And her heart monitor tipped Chandra off to other problems.
This is the first day that I noticed it. And it looks like I'm doing wild exercise bouts with a bit of rest in between, but that was actually sitting around doing nothing all day.
Is there a part of you that wishes you at least had that diagnosis so that you could say, yes, this is definitely COVID?
Yeah, in the beginning it didn't seem to matter because I thought we would bounce back. There was just no way of knowing that this was something that was going to last far beyond the 2 weeks.
And without that, you're kind of left in this limbo.
Yeah, there's no treatment protocol. Doctors have no idea what's going on. And the problem is that while there's starting to be research into long haulers, most of us who got sick in March and April are excluded from that research.
But that may soon change. At Toronto Western Hospital, the University Health Network's national research study into long-term effects of COVID-19 is now underway. It's being led by Dr. Margaret Herridge and Dr. Angela Chung. 2,000 Canadian COVID survivors, like Heather Warren, will be tracked over the next year.
You know if it gets uncomfortable at all.
They'll have their vital signs monitored.
Going to kind of get you to put your arm up like that.
Their strength and fitness levels documented.
Resist my pressure with your arm there. I'm going to read a list of 5 objects to you and then ask you a question to follow up at the end there.
And their cognitive ability measured. Initially, the study only involved those with a confirmed positive test. But the study authors have now applied to expand the scope to include untested long haulers. Antibody testing would be used to confirm that they were in fact exposed to the virus.
There are many people who seem to have symptoms, but they have never tested positive. We are going to offer people with symptoms consistent with COVID-19 antibody testing, catching as many people as possible, those who have been exposed to COVID-19.
Does it surprise you at how long people are suffering with extreme fatigue, with muscle ache, with brain fog?
Yes and no. If we compare to the flu, Usually people will get over the flu in a short period of time. But there are many viruses, West Nile, HIV, where you can see effects longer term. We have only known this virus for 8-9 months, and so there are lots of things that we don't know about it.
By next year, the study authors hope to have a clearer picture of the long-term effects of COVID-19, both for those who were critically ill and those like Chandra and her family, who've been struggling for months with a long list of strange symptoms.
The scariest part has been not knowing what the future will hold, whether this will ever go away, what the nature of the disease is.
It's one thing for you to be concerned about what the long-term implication might be for you. It's another to think about your youngest children, your 7-year-old twins.
That's been a really terrifying prospect.
Do you think about that?
I try not to think about it too much because it's hard to take. It's one thing at 40 to think that this might shape the rest of my life, but I hate to think that the bad luck of being exposed to a tiny virus is going to shape the rest of their lives.
Back in British Columbia, dentist Mike Chow presses on with his workout regime, hoping it will push him into the fully recovered phase of this disease.
She got a couple bars yesterday.
6 months after being infected with the virus, including a 2-month life and death battle in hospital, Mike is grateful for these backyard afternoons with his family. But with another wave looming, Dr. Chow has a word of warning.
You don't want to go through what I went through. You just never know how it's going to hit you. If it hits you mildly, you can still have post-COVID issues afterwards. You might never ever be the same again. Who knows?
Now, it is important to remember that the vast majority of people who get COVID-19 suffer mild to moderate symptoms. But what researchers are trying to figure out now is why some people get hit so hard and suffer for so long.